In this webinar, we'll be looking at BioCyc tools for navigating regulatory networks and for analyzing omics datasets. I'm Peter Midford, a member of the Bioinformatics Research Group at SRI International. The Pathway Tools Regulatory Overview is a visual representation of a cell's transcriptional regulatory network and a tool for interrogating relationships within this network. As before, we'll start at the BioCyc homepage, but it is always good to check whether you've selected a database that includes information about regulation. I'll show you one way to do this from the dialog for choosing an organism database. I'll click on the Change Organism Database command at the right side of the web page title bar. This brings up a window with multiple panes, each pane providing a different mechanism for selecting a database. The first two panes allow you to choose an organism database by name or by browsing through a taxonomic hierarchy, but we want the third option, which gives us a list of databases filtered by properties of the organism or the database. I'll choose this pane and then choose the property Count of Transcriptional Regulatory Interactions from the leftmost dropdown on the first row. In the next dropdown, we can choose to filter on the presence or absence of a value, or compare the value against a specific value or numerical cutoff. We could filter either by the presence of a value or compare against 0. I'll demonstrate comparing against 0. First, I choose Has Values in the second dropdown. Then, the dropdowns that appeared when I selected the property allow me to choose a comparison and specify a comparison value. I'll choose greater than for the comparison and type in 0 for the comparison value. Then I click on Find Organisms. Now the filter returns 104 databases, each of which represents an organism with one or more transcriptional regulatory interactions known. Next, I will scroll down to E. coli K12MG1655 and select it. I see that there are 3,391 interactions known for this strain. If I click OK, it will load the selected database and take me to its summary page. But since E. coli is already the selected database, I'll cancel here. The Regulatory Overview page is available on the Genome menu under Regulatory Overview. If it is grayed out, you'll need to select another database as I just described. Selecting Regulatory Overview brings up a diagram for displaying regulatory relations, along with the three tools we saw in the Cellular Overview: the Pan Zoom tool, an Overlay Legend window, and the Operations menu, which I will be toggling on and off throughout this webinar. The diagram itself consists of three concentric ovals of figures or icons, each representing a single gene in E. coli. The outer ring consists of genes that are subject to regulation, but themselves have no regulatory effect on other genes. The middle ring consists of genes that regulate other genes, but are also subject to regulation. The inner ring consists of the fraction of genes, about 15%, that regulate the most other genes. As with the Cellular Overview, there is a legend available to explain the shapes of the different icons representing genes, as well as the arrangement of genes in different rings. Just remember that it is here if you need it. The outer ring is organized into groups of genes that are regulated by the same set of regulatory genes, sometimes referred to as multiregulons. To include all the genes in some of these groups, the set is extended outward along a line which may lead to a triangle. Each gene in the triangle will have the same set of regulators, although the influence of particular regulators may differ. A gene is shown as a plus if all its regulators activated, as a minus if all regulators inhibited, and as a circle if it has a mix of positive and negative regulators. The icon representing each gene will put up a simple summary window when the mouse cursor rolls over it. Looking at a gene from the outer ring, we can see the rollover window includes the gene's name, the name of its product, ligands, the genes that regulators, those that regulates, regulatees, and the members of the operon, if any, that the gene is a member of. Remember, genes in the outer ring don't regulate other genes, while genes in the middle oval both regulate and are regulated, and those in the inner oval regulate lots of other genes. But in addition to naming regulatory relations, the overview can visualize them. Let's start with MOD-E, a transcriptional regulator that uses a molybdate ion as its ligand. If I right-click on it, or control-click for Mac users, I get a pop-up menu with several highlighting options. The first just highlights the gene itself, but since we've already found it, it's more interesting to start with its direct regulatees, so I'll choose that. And what we see is a pattern of 9 directed lines from MOD-E to locations in the outer oval. However, just because there are 9 lines, don't assume that only 9 genes are regulated by MOD-E. One way to see this is to look at the overview legend. And as in the cellular overview, the newly overlaid lines are represented in matching color in the legend. Also, there is a button to list the regulated genes, which I will bring up. As I scroll down the list, there are 2 things to notice. First, there are 47 regulated genes, not just 9 on the list. Also, here at number 33, we find MOD-E itself, indicating that it is regulated by its own product. If you are wondering about the 37 genes beyond the 9 in MOD-E itself, you need to remember how gene groups in this diagram are organized. This gene group here contains a set of E. coli genes that are regulated by MOD-E and their regulators FLHC, FLHD, FNR, NARL, and NARP. As shown in the bottom of this tooltip, all of these genes are in a single operon. If I click on the gene CCMA, we'll open up its gene page. We can navigate to its operon diagram as follows. MOD-E is involved in regulating lots of genes, but let's take a look at a gene that doesn't regulate anything, but is regulated by more than one gene. I'll start by clearing the existing highlighting. The gene I'll demonstrate is LUXS, which is involved in the production of the intercellular signaling compound autoinducer 2, which is involved in quorum sensing. I'll find this gene by highlighting it using the Genes by Name or Frame ID command. I select the command, type in the name, and click Highlight. The gene is highlighted off to the left. If I right or control click on the gene, I have the option of showing either direct or indirect regulators. If you are interested in both, I recommend selecting the indirect regulators first. So I'll select indirect regulators, and I see a network involving multiple genes, with 2 links converging on the LUXS gene. I can verify the direct regulators by locating the gene again, right-clicking, and selecting direct regulators, which will show in a new color over the indirect regulator network. I can toggle the direct regulator checkbox in the overlay legend to verify that the direct regulators are included in the indirect network. Because I selected the indirect network first, the direct regulation links are drawn on a higher layer than the indirect links and will always be drawn over them. If I had selected the direct network first, some of the links might be drawn over as members of the indirect network. This diagram is rather complicated, but there is a way to simplify the presentation by changing the layout and removing genes that aren't in the subnetwork. To do this, I just need to choose Redisplay Highlighted Genes Only on the operation menu. Now 2 things have happened. First, only the genes in the network are displayed, as you probably expected, but also the layout has changed from concentric ovals to a top-to-bottom layout of tiers or layers. At the top are the genes with the largest number of regulatory connections, the ones in the inner oval in the diagram. Working down are layers that regulate fewer genes, while picking up more regulators above them. At the bottom is LUXS, which we know has no regulatory effect on other genes. The top-to-bottom layout is available at any time, not just when displaying highlighted genes. You can change the layout between top to bottom and nested ellipses with the Change Layout command in the Operations menu. Note that if I clear all highlighting, neither the layout nor the set of genes displayed are changed. To get back to the starting point, you also need to redisplay the regulatory overview. We can also use terms from the gene ontology to select sets of genes whose products are annotated to a common gene ontology class. This allows us to see if genes with functionally related products share a regulatory network. I'll present an example, lipid metabolism, which contains several disjoint regulatory networks. I'll start by selecting genes by gene ontology terms and start working down the hierarchy from biological process. I'll use the Expand button to open biological process, then I'll open metabolic process. From there, I'll open primary metabolic process. Finally, I'll select lipid metabolic process by clicking on the checkbox instead of the Expand button and clicking on the Windows highlight button. The Go term ID appears in the overlay legend, and we can see multiple gene groups, at least 10 in the outer ring, are involved, as well as several in the middle ring. The gene FADR appears to regulate most, but not all of this network. I'll clear the highlighting for a final example. Let's try a more complex example and see how we can manage that complexity. Let's start with a well-connected gene, FNR. Because FNR appears in the inner oval, it is easy to find, and I can highlight it just by right-clicking over it. As with LUXS, I'll start by exploring by highlighting the most inclusive network. I'll right-click on the gene and select Highlight Gene FNR and its direct and indirect regulators and regulators. And we see a very dense network covering a majority of gene groups in the outer oval, and though it's hard to tell, many genes in the inner two ovals. Also, FNR itself has been buried. So I'll use the Overlay Legend menu to turn off this particular highlighting so I can see FNR again. Now let's add a layer containing just the direct and indirect regulators. Again, I right-click on FNR and select Highlight Gene FNR and its direct and indirect regulators. And we see a much smaller network, and along each pathway link, small triangles pointing the direction towards FNR, the endpoint. If we turn the checkbox for the full network back on, the overlay for just the regulators remains on top. We can highlight just the direct regulators in the same way. First, I'll turn off the full network again. Now I can see FNR, and I'll use the same menu as before to highlight the direct regulators. Once I see the direct regulators highlighted, I can verify they are included in the indirect network by toggling the checkbox for the direct regulators. The diagram is rather crowded close to FNR, and I think several indirect paths are converging on the gene FUR, which is displayed right next to FNR. To check that this is the case, I will change the display to just highlighted genes, which will change the relative positions of the gene icons and make it clearer which regulatory links are running through FUR. Well, that concludes this highlights tour of the regulatory overview in BioCyc. We covered the layout of this overview, why genes are placed where they are, and how to find regulatory links using both mouse rollovers and by displaying links. We also looked at the alternative top-to-bottom layout and how to use checkboxes in the layout legend to manage the complexity of the display. I hope you have found it useful. Thank you for watching.